Videos like this from NBC News titled War Games, The Battle for Taiwan. These are extremely and deliberately misleading. In the very opening segment, they deliberately mischaracterize Taiwan, leading viewers to somehow believe that Taiwan is an independent country that China is simply bullying. They even asked the question, what would the US do if China invaded Taiwan? China would never resort to military force unless provoked by the United States in the first place. This video is an answer to NBC News and all of these other Western media outlets trying to analyze what China would do to forcefully reunify Taiwan. To understand all of this, you have to understand what Taiwan's status is in the first place. It's not an independent country. No country on earth recognizes Taiwan, the island, as an independent country. Even the administration on Taiwan itself does not consider itself an independent country. It is officially known as the Republic of China, and it claims to be the sole legitimate government of all of China, which includes the mainland, which I think we can all agree is extremely unrealistic. And this is why most nations on earth recognize a one China policy with Beijing, that there is only one China, which includes Taiwan. There's only one single government of all of China, and that is the People's Republic of China, based in Beijing, not the Republic of China based in Taipei. It is a holdover from the Cold War. There was a civil war in China. The Communist Party of China, CPC, won, and the Republic of China lost. And they fled to the furthest corner of China, and that's where they sat, and they refused to reconcile with the winning side. That was the Kuomintang Party on Taiwan. First generation refused to reconcile with the mainland. Successive Kuomintang leadership began a reconciliation process with the mainland, and until very recently, it was heading in the direction of a very slow, gradual, conditional reunification with the rest of China. The United States has a one China policy, and it is based on communication with Beijing itself. One of these communiques took place on February 28th, 1972. It's officially called the Joint Communique of the United States of America and the People's Republic of China. It's also known as the Shanghai Communique. This is exactly what it says. It says, the US side declared, the United States acknowledges that all Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintain there is but one China and that Taiwan is a part of China. The United States government does not challenge that position. It reaffirms its interests in a peaceful settlement of the Taiwan question by the Chinese themselves. And this is exactly what was happening between the Kuomintang on Taiwan and the People's Republic of China, the Communist Party of China, on the mainland. They were reconciling and they were resolving this issue. The US saw this, and in order to foil a peaceful reunification, they pumped millions of dollars and political support behind the Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP. This is the ruling party of Taiwan's administration today, headed by Tsai Ing-wen, who US Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi went to go visit very recently. So the United States is violating its own one China policy. You might say, well, that was 1972, maybe something changed. If you go to the US State Department's official website today, this is exactly what it says. It says, the United States' approach to Taiwan has remained consistent across decades and administrations. So no, nothing changed. It says, the United States has a long-standing one China policy, which is guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 US-China joint communiques, including the one that I read from, and 6 assurances. We oppose any unilateral changes to the status quo from either side. We do not support Taiwan independence. That's what it says on the US State Department's website right now. Go check it. And we expect cross-strait differences to be resolved by peaceful means. Yet when the Kuomintang in Taiwan and the Communist Party of China on the mainland began doing this, the US derailed it by pumping money and support behind the DPP to deliberately derail peaceful reunification and the peaceful resolving of this issue. It is the United States undermining its own bilateral agreement it made with Beijing, violating international law regarding sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity, and undermining Chinese sovereignty over Taiwan. That was what the whole trip of US Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan without China's authorization. It's about undermining all of these agreements and obligations the US has, both with China and under international law. Let's talk a little bit about peaceful reunification. Economically, Taiwan's economy is tied very closely to the mainland. Almost 50% of their exports go to the mainland. That is a very significant amount. And the United States, Japan, Singapore, South Korea combined only amounts to 28%, all taken together. And it would be through additional economic opportunities for businesses and investors on Taiwan and vice versa on the mainland between each other. That is how Taiwan would eventually be integrated. Their economy is heavily dependent on chip manufacturing and electronic components. The biggest is TSMC. This is the largest company in Taiwan, and the US clearly sees the future in store for Taiwan is to use it as a battering ram against the rest of China, just like the US is using Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia. They know that there's no future for Taiwan if this plan reaches fruition. And so what they've already started doing is investing in domestic chip production in the United States. And they forced TSMC to divulge trade secrets so they could essentially strip mine everything valuable about TSMC, bring it to the United States, and so when Taiwan was burned to the ground, they would have everything they needed already in the United States. They're pulling the economic rug out from under Taiwan. Who is going to step in and help Taiwan? Who is going to be able to offer alternatives, economic alternatives for Taiwan? The rest of China, of course. And so if the US just took its hands off of this whole process, that is exactly how Taiwan would reunify with China. It would be peaceful and it would be best for everyone on both sides of the strait. But that's not what the United States wants. No. They want to put a political party into power that is going to pursue separatism, whether overtly or covertly, and they want to stir up as much trouble as possible. And they will destroy Taiwan in the process, just like they're destroying Ukraine. So if peaceful reunification is not possible, and before resorting to military options, China might use some of its economic leverage over Taiwan. If they wanted to destroy the Taiwanese economy, they could just stop trading with Taiwan and the economy would collapse. And the DPP in power would be out of power most likely, and someone more reasonable would hopefully take their place. Why would China choose the military option? If there's this economic option they can use to put pressure on the DPP, probably get them out of power, why would they resort to military means? Well, look at this article from Military Review. This is put out by the U.S. Army University Press, and it's titled Deterring the Dragon, Returning U.S. Forces to Taiwan. Because yes, at one point, the U.S. had thousands of troops in Taiwan. It was part of U.S. containment policy against China. When the U.S. recognized the One China policy, they also recognized Beijing's sovereignty over Taiwan, and thus they could no longer keep troops there. This is a 2020 article put out by the US military saying, let's send troops back. The article says the United States needs to recognize that its conventional deterrence against the People's Liberation Army action to reunify Taiwan may not continue to hold without a change in force posture. Deterrence should always be prioritized over open conflict between peer or near peer states because of the exorbitant cost of a war between them. If the United States wants to maintain credible conventional deterrence against a PLA attack on Taiwan, it needs to consider basing troops in Taiwan. And the article complains about how the U.S. military has been kicked out of Southeast Asia. The Philippines refuses to host U.S. troops. Elsewhere across U.S. policy papers and the Western media, they complain that Southeast Asian countries are doing too much business with China. They refuse to host U.S. missiles. The U.S. wants to point at China, essentially point at the biggest trade partner of Southeast Asia. What's left for the U.S.? The U.S., by the way, is on the other side of the planet. It has to cross the entire Pacific Ocean just to get involved with Taiwan in the first place. They're considering the fact that China has considerable military means to prevent the US from getting involved in Taiwan in the first place, unless they're already based in Taiwan. and this is because of China's unique military capabilities. The article continues, ground forces based in Taiwan would not only be important for repelling a PLA invasion, but more importantly, they would act like what RAND, they're talking about the RAND Corporation, calls a tripwire, that is, smaller numbers of ground forces stationed to ensure that US forces quickly become directly involved in a potential adversary invasion. In other words, using them as a pretext to start a much wider war. So again, I hope you can see who's at the root of this problem. It is not China. And this is what the article says in conclusion. The United States needs to consider basing ground forces in Taiwan if it is committed to defending Taiwanese sovereignty, although the US doesn't recognize Taiwanese sovereignty. The regional balance of power in East Asia continues to tilt away from the United States and Taiwan toward mainland China. China is actually located in East Asia. The United States is not. So why should the balance of power in East Asia tilt toward a nation that's not even located in the region? Again, ask yourself that. It also says, without US forces in Taiwan, it is increasingly likely that China will attempt to integrate Taiwan into its republic by force. US deterrence will continue to erode, paradoxically increasing the risk of conflict. I don't think so. Again, these people writing these type of papers are starting at a flawed premise that the US can or should prevent China's rise. It cannot and it should not, but if you are starting at a flawed premise, everything from that flawed premise is going to be flawed in turn. If this sounds like a crazy idea, how about finding out that the US already actually does have troops on Taiwan? This is a Voice of America article. US nearly doubled military personnel stationed in Taiwan this year. And the article says, the United States has doubled its unofficial military presence in Taiwan over the past year in what specialists describe as the latest signal to China that Taiwan's future remains a priority. While the United States has not disclosed what the military personnel are doing, at the very least, it is sending a strong signal to China. Considering that China faces the de facto annexation of Taiwan by the United States in this bizarre double game that they're playing where they recognize the one China policy, but they do whatever they want within territory they recognize as Chinese. This game where they're going to continue increasing the US troop presence, hoping to deter China from acting on Taiwan, knowing that if the US wasn't involved at all, the cross-strait issue would be resolved peacefully.